One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey folks, it's Sam Jacobs. You're listening to the Sales Hacker Podcast. We've got a fantastic show coming up today. We've got David Katz, who's a senior sales director at Intercom. He's managing a team of 80 across EMEA, APAC, and the Americas. And he's had a great career starting off early on in executive search and then moving into LinkedIn and then Dropbox. And one of the things we're going to be talking about today is how to move up market and how to take a company that's been focused on high volume SMB, high velocity sales and move them into the enterprise and what tools and methodologies you need to make that successful. So it's a great show. Before we dive into it, we're going to thank our sponsors. The first is Chorus. So Chorus.ai, the leading conversation intelligence platform for high-growth sales teams. Chorus records, transcribes, and analyzes business conversations in real time to coach reps on how to become top performers with Chorus. More reps meet quota, new hires ramp faster, leaders become better coaches, and everyone in the organization can collaborate over the actual voice of the customer. Check out Chorus.ai/saleshacker to see what they're up to. Our second sponsor is Outreach. That's Outreach.io, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach supports sales reps by enabling them to humanize their communications at scale, from automating the soul-sucking manual work that eats up selling time to providing action-oriented tips on what communications are working best. Outreach has your back. Lastly, quick plug for Revenue Collective. It's the business that I run during the day when I'm not hosting a podcast for Sales Hacker. We're in 6 cities: Denver, Boston, New York, London, Toronto, Amsterdam. Actually, this week, I'll be in Amsterdam for our first official Revenue Collective dinner with the Amsterdam Revenue Collective. But if you're out there listening and you're either in one of those cities and you're a VP level or above, commercial operator, that means sales, marketing, or operations executive responsible for helping the company make money, reach out to me if you're interested in joining. It's invitation only, but of course, invitation can come from me if you reach out. And if you're in a city where there is no Revenue Collective chapter officially, just know that we've got plenty of remote members, people from places like Paris, Indianapolis, Manchester, UK, Sydney, Australia, all over the country and all over the world. Folks are chiming in because they want to build highly engaged communities of sales and marketing executives so that we can all collaborate, help each other succeed, help each other improve in our day jobs, and help achieve our career goals. So that's that. Now, without further ado, let's listen to David Katz, who gives a great interview from Intercom and talks about how to move up market. Hey, everybody. It's Sam Jacobs, founder of the Revenue Collective, and of course, the host of what you're listening to right now, which is the Sales Hacker Podcast. Today, we are incredibly excited to have the Senior Director of Sales from Intercom, Mr. David Katz, on the show. David is responsible for global sales and customer solutions teams across EMEA, APAC, so that's Europe and Asia, and the Americas. And prior to joining Intercom, David was the director of mid-market enterprise sales at Dropbox, publicly traded company, where he built the first upmarket sales team and helped grow the organization from a handful of people to several hundred. We're incredibly excited to have him on the show. David, welcome to the show.
Sam, thank you for having me. And you made me sound really fancy. Thank you for that introduction.
You're very fancy. All people are fancy in their own way, but you are particularly fancy. Well, welcome. So what we like to do is we like to start with a baseball card. We like to sort of learn a little bit about you, give you an opportunity to tell us about this little company called Intercom that we've all probably heard of. So your name is David Katz. Give us your official title.
Sure. The official on the business card title would be Senior Director of Global Sales and Customer Solutions.
Fantastic. And so that remit, does that mean that you are responsible for both new business and existing business?
That's correct. Yep. So cool. We split those teams into actually 2 components, and I'm happy to talk about our org structure if that's cool and interesting to you.
It is very interesting. Let's get there right after we figure out who. There are probably 3 people in the universe that do not know what Intercom is or who Intercom is. So give us what is the company that is Intercom?
So I'll back up slightly. I think what we all have experienced in our own lives is a situation where you're trying to get in touch with a company you do business with, and that process is painful. Imagine you are getting a text from your bank saying that there is potential credit card fraud, and you want to follow up with them, and you go on their website, and you go to the support page, and you're trying to dig through and figure out what support thing do I click on, what information I have to fill out, and then you do all those things as you're worried about what's going on with your bank account. And then it says, great, someone from our team will be back in touch with you. Goodbye.
Deeply unsatisfying.
Yeah, it's not a great experience. And I think, the thing is in the modern world, we expect immediate response and solution. And I think because everything in our world these days, and I'd be interested to talk about this with you a little bit too, is we all are looking for immediacy. We want that first response time, and we expect things to happen instantaneously. And so we expect that to happen with the businesses we do business with. And that's not always the case with internet businesses. And so we're trying to solve that. So what we're trying to do is, as a mission, is bring personalization back to internet businesses.
Wow.
And really what we are seeing with our customers, we've got about 30,000 plus of them, by the way, humble brag.
Damn. That's a lot.
Is
That's just a direct brag. That's not even humble brag.
It's just a blunt brag. What we see with our customers is they experience faster growth because of these better customer relationships. And I think where we're kind of unique is we can help you with those communications with prospective customers, current new customers that you're onboarding, as well as customers that have been around for a while that maybe need to reset their password and talk with you from a support perspective. So we have a platform that literally lets you communicate with prospective and current customers across all segments of the customer journey.
I feel like, there's a bunch of other companies that are either doing elements of what you all do or copying your entire product roadmap. I felt like you guys created the category, or you all created the category. I'm trying to say you guys less. But do you have a category name that you describe that is the umbrella of what Intercom is and does?
Ooh, that's a good one. Not really. It's really just customer communication in general.
Okay, got it.
I think broadly. And so it's hard to put in a category because a little bit of what we do is kind of live chat. A little bit of what we do is, could be deemed as, marketing automation or lifecycle marketing. And then certainly as a component, that's also support as well. I don't really know there's a great name for this new category that I think we're helping create and others are quickly jumping into.
Well, that's an opportunity for you all, because if there's a book I read called Play Bigger, and the whole conceit of that book is that if you name the category, you get 10x returns on your money. It's like just a massively more value accretive concept when you own the category. However, Intercom. So, how large are you all in terms of ARR? What can you share with us? Obviously, we don't need confidential information. I'm sure you're on a path to some kind of exciting event. So tell us what you can share about sort of like the rough revenue range.
Yeah. So from an employee standpoint, we are quickly approaching 1,000 employees globally.
Wow.
We're a little under that. From a revenue perspective, we are a private company. The last information we shared publicly around our revenue was a couple years ago. So I'll have to benchmark us or index us there. And back then we were doing 50 million in annual recurring revenue. I would say that we have far surpassed that at this point, and we've broken through, I think a couple of the areas where a lot of companies start to tap out or things get a lot harder. If you're familiar with the grow faster, die slow, McKinsey component of some of their communication from a couple of years ago, there's a certain mark that they talk about a lot of companies start to really slow down and lose steam at, and we've kind of blown through that, which is great to see.
That's fantastic. And that mark probably implies, as I mentioned, something exciting for the future. So congratulations on that. So you were responsible. Tell us about your org and all of the different functions that are encompassed in it.
Yeah, so there are 4 different roles within my organization globally. So we have account executives who are purely net new business acquisition. And so they're out there hunting on a daily basis to help prospective customers become current customers. Once said people become current customers, we then introduce them to what we call here relationship managers. A lot of organizations might refer to this team as account managers. And our relationship managers are responsible for onboarding their new customers, making them successful from day one. But they're also responsible for, kind of renewing that business at the end of the terms of their contract, as well as hopefully expanding the footprint we have with that customer over time by upselling and cross-selling them to new products, new tiers, et cetera. And then the third component would be sales engineers, who for us are primarily pre-sale focused, but there are certainly occasions within some of our larger customers where we bring them in to kind of help us with a new potential evaluation. And then we also have customer success managers. And it really, I think this term gets thrown around loosely at a lot of companies. For us, CSM is essentially a product consultant. So these folks do a lot of training, implementation, and kind of ongoing education of our largest customers to make sure they're successful with what they currently have and that we can help them understand things that are coming down the road.
So the account management team at Intercom is the daily point of contact for questions that the customer has?
Yes, exactly. So we have them, they run Point kind of as the quarterback and bring in the appropriate internal folks as necessary to solve customer needs.
That's great. That's I don't know if it's controversial, but there's definitely two paths these days. One of them is that, there's a customer success team or some kind of customer team that doesn't have a revenue responsibility, that isn't responsible for, maybe they're responsible for like gross retention, but they're not necessarily responsible for the renewal or for expansion. And then there's other folks that are still housing all of that, the daily point of contact, in addition to the revenue responsibility with the account management team. It sounds like you all are the latter.
Yeah. And it's definitely something that we discuss on an ongoing basis and have thought about changing over time. And who knows what the future holds for us. There are pros and cons to both, I think, that we could agree on. I just think, where we are now, one of our kind of mantras internally is focus breeds excellence. So we really, I think, from a profile of the people we have with different responsibilities, want them to be as focused as we can. And, I think for where we are in our maturity, having relationship managers really own that relationship, but be very revenue focused, whether it's retention or expansion, that has worked and served us really well so far.
It's certainly a framework that I identify with. Let's dive into a little bit about David Katz, the human, and then we can talk about some of your areas of expertise. But where are you from? Give us a little bit about your background, and then walk us through a little bit about your startup career, your early career pre-startup, just to understand how you got to be, running an 80-plus person team at one of the fastest growing, recurring revenue software businesses out there.
Yeah. So I'm originally from the great state of New Hampshire. The Granite State, live free or die.
Live free or die.
Live free or die. Yeah. And I think usually I get weird looks from people. I'm like, yeah, look, it's that state you drive through when you're going to Vermont or Maine.
My brother lives in New Hampshire. Let's not denigrate it like that.
Fantastic. Yeah. Whereabouts in New Hampshire?
He lives in Exeter, East Kingston.
Yeah, of course.
Town. Yeah.
Awesome.
The Seacoast, as they call it.
Seacoast. Beautiful area. Love that little strip of seacoast we have there. So it's from this the center of the state, really small town, about 5,000 people. And it was certainly like a summer vacation destination for people. So, the population in the wintertime was about 5,000, but it would balloon to about 60,000 in the summer, just given the kind of beautiful lake that I was so fortunate to grow up on.
Is that Lake Winnipesaukee?
Lake Winnipesaukee, yeah. Yeah, I know. I think Jimmy Fallon does a great skit with Justin Timberlake about like being at camp on Lake Winnipesaukee. And I think that really put us on the map. So super.
I went to summer camp around there too. So I'm guilty as charged.
Yeah, so you can relate. It's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
And from there, I went to college in upstate New York at Syracuse University. Really thought I wanted to study law and public policy. I became really interested in government in high school and was part of a debate team. And I think actually, when I look back at it now, I think I really just loved debating and conjecture, and it wasn't really the law component. I just liked to win, which is probably part of the reason I'm in sales now.
And argue with people.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully I've gotten a little bit better at it as I've gotten older. But went to school in Syracuse, studied public policy, had a phenomenal experience there, met my future wife there, and look back on those blustery, snowy days very lovingly. But really also what that experience taught me is when I graduated was, wow, this is really not what I want to do. So I had a lot of great internships with the Department of Public Health. I worked for the Housing and Urban Development League. And all of those experiences were rewarding in terms of the mission of the organization, but the day-to-day work was just really uninspiring.
Tell us, let's dive into that particular point, because I find that a lot of people, when they're trying to identify, what motivates them and what they're passionate about in their careers, are often caught in some of these circumstances. So what was it about the day-to-day work that you found uninspiring that prompted you to kind of get up and go?
Yeah, I think it was the mentality of the folks that I was working alongside was one where, you were counting down the time to your lunch. You were counting down the time to when you got to go home. Resources were hard to come by. And I think given, whatever was top of mind in the political climate, things could quickly change. And you might have been working on something that was very meaningful to you and to the organization for months, and then it could get shelved very quickly as a new administration would come in. So I just, not being able to, very tangibly see the result of the work I was part of and not working with people that I felt were super inspired by their work, it was just really hard to stay motivated.
Yeah. So what'd you do?
So, and this is actually funny for what I'll talk about later. So I actually went on Career Builder and Monster and posted my resume because I just realized, like, gosh, I really don't want to follow this line of work. And I kind of realized that as much as I love to read personally, reading for a living probably ruled out being a lawyer for myself. And I was actually contacted by this small company called J. Robert Scott. And this company was actually an executive search firm, the headhunting firm, which was an industry I knew nothing about, didn't even know it existed when I was in school. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I take an interview with them? So they were based in Boston, or are based in Boston today. And I went and learned more about the company and realized, like, wow, this is actually a really fascinating space. So what J. Robert Scott does is they work with venture capital firms and their portfolio companies to help them make additions or changes to their executive leadership team over time as those companies mature and grow. And what I realized I was going to be able to do was be exposed to these really fascinating entrepreneurs and their companies and really learn about so many different industries and kind of challenges and disruptive technologies from the outside looking in. And I was like, well, if anything, this will kind of serve as my MBA for a couple of years. And so I was fortunate enough to get a job with them in a research capacity where I was helping research, the technologies that a company might be working on. So I learned about things like thin film technologies for, photovoltaics companies. I got to learn about medical device technologies and all the different regulation that goes into place there. But I also got to work with, some interesting software companies and be part of board meetings and sit in on them and kind of have this outside lens looking in as what it would be like to be part of these companies and some of the higher level kind of commercial challenges they face as they grow and continue to evolve.
Wow. And so how did that lead you ultimately to LinkedIn? Walk us through that journey. Or maybe you worked at Fidelity too, if I'm not mistaken.
So J. Robert Scott was actually a wholly owned subsidiary of Fidelity Investments.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Really fascinating relationship there. So I think it was like back in the 80s, the Johnson family, who owns and privately owns and runs Fidelity, wasn't satisfied with some of the executive search firms they were working with in industry and said, you know what, let's build our own. So that's actually was started back in the 80s. And so all of the work was primarily done to do in-house executive search, but being based in Boston with the kind of tech community and the kind of biopharmaceutical community that existed there presented a lot of opportunity to start working with the venture capital community. And so that kind of just happened naturally over time. But it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Fidelity. Since my departure, the partners within the firm actually spun it out, kind of bought it out from Fidelity, and now it's called Park Square Executive Search, and it's based in Cambridge.
I love it. And so what is the jump from there? Did you get to meet the people at LinkedIn or what was the transition?
So we realized that we were spending a lot of time flying back and forth from San Francisco, either pitching clients or working with clients. And so it came to the point when I was there of, hey, we probably need a West Coast office. So we hired this gentleman who was phenomenal named Eric Lund from one of the bigger executive search firms called Heidrick and Struggles. And Eric and I got to work on a couple different engagements together and really had a great working relationship. And he asked me, he's like, hey, why don't you move out here? Help me kind of get this office up and going. And so, I asked my then girlfriend, now wife, hey, what do you think about picking up and moving to the West Coast? She was excited about it. Her parents less so. But we picked up and moved out to the West Coast. And I spent a year with him kind of hiring in a couple other partners, helping us build some West Coast business and executing against some of the search work we were doing. And in that process, just caught the bug. It's really hard not to if you live out here. I had so many friends that I met that were working for these interesting technology companies. And I started to get the itch like, man, I really got to go in-house and work for one of these companies and see what that really feels like. So I started thinking through what skills did I have that I thought would be broadly applicable at a technology company? And also, what technology do I really love and rely on that I know I'd be passionate about selling? And when I started to kind of put that list together, LinkedIn quickly kind of rose to the top as my top priority for a company that I wanted to work for and be part of that sales team. So I literally cold called my way in. I found a guy who worked there. His name is Tyler Hubbs, who had a background similar to mine. And I cold called him. I left him a voicemail and said, hey, we have similar backgrounds. I see you recently joined LinkedIn on the sales team. I'd love to talk about what that experience was like for you. And he actually called me back. And for all those that work in sales and leave voicemails all the time, it's awesome when you get a call back.
Yes.
And he called me back and invited me down. And we had lunch on campus. And back then, LinkedIn was pretty much just down in Mountain View and kind of surrounded by Google. So I went down there, had lunch with him, got introduced to the then vice president of sales, James Volpentest. And they were hiring like crazy. This was, end of 2010. They were getting ready for an IPO. They were quickly approaching about 1,000 employees and really had found strong market fit for their recruiting software. And so, they took a bet on me as someone who didn't have software sales experience, and I wanted to make sure I didn't let them down.
That's fantastic. And so to walk us through what's been the journey recently. You were at Dropbox, you've been at Intercom a little while. So walk us through how it went at LinkedIn and then how you got to Dropbox. And then from there, we'll dive into, some of the things that you've learned along the way.
Yeah. The only way to describe my experience at LinkedIn is transformational. It changed the complete trajectory of my career, and I'll forever be in debt to that company and to the folks that took bets on me multiple times. So I was very fortunate to join as an account executive there. And then in pretty short order, kind of learned, a repeatable process that worked for myself and was given an opportunity to become what we called at the point team lead. And so I actually took on responsibility for 3 other account executives and was responsible for kind of my number, but then also theirs, and had to play this kind of player coach role. And this was a role where I was working with 3 folks who were just not really fully reaching their potential from a results perspective. And the thought for the company was, well, this guy seems like he's kind of figuring out, let's see if he can kind of help these other folks. And we did. And, we had a great couple quarters together. People started hitting their targets. A couple of them got promoted. And that really helped me realize like, wow, I actually really love coaching. And actually found the challenge of how do I help other people learn how to sell the way that'll work for them, that's authentic and genuine, and then they can get excited about, is a more rewarding and challenging endeavor. And so, I threw my hat in the ring then for my first manager role, got an opportunity to manage a sales development team, which I still look back on as one of the most fun experiences I've had in terms of managing teams, given the kind of the sponge-like mentality of that team and kind of the energy that they had, and did that for a while, and then went back to actually managing a team on the West Coast for LinkedIn of account executives after that, and had some experience and success there, and actually just honestly got recruited to Dropbox. And at the time, they were actually looking to take a bet themselves on someone who could come in and help them build an outbound sales team. And for better or for worse, they took that bet on me, and that was back in end of 2013.
Wow. You got into sales from executive search, essentially. Was it LinkedIn investing in, were you trained in classic sales methodology? Did you have some experience with Miller Hyman or, force management coming in and putting in MEDDIC? And how did you interpret that sales methodology? And then how did you learn how to become a manager? Those are when you go into Intercom, do you have a playbook that you're running, and how did you build that playbook?
Yeah. So yes. So when I was in executive search, there really wasn't a lot of training. And, as I kind of evolved in working for J. Robert Scott, you're selling. I'm trying to sell senior executives on why they should think about leaving a very fruitful endeavor that they're on right now with a company and hear me out about another opportunity. And then you're selling then your candidates on your client and helping them understand, why this person could be a good fit for them on these very important, very strategic hires. And then you're at the same time selling new business. And so you're constantly selling, but I had no framework, no previous experience, and was really just kind of relying on intuition and just trying to mimic what I was seeing that seemed to be working for some of the partners I worked with. And I was very fortunate to work with some incredible partners who really knew how to sell. And more importantly than anything, they knew how to listen. And that's what I really took away from that. At LinkedIn, kind of the classic Sandler sales methodology was really kind of drilled into us and kind of talking through, the pain funnel and things like that. And then over time, I kind of learned different things around, Medic became a big one that was important to us. And I took some of those things with me to Dropbox where there was no blueprint, no playbook, and kind of rolled out some basic methodologies there. And yeah, for sure. I mean, there are things that I've learned along the way that I've seen repeatability from that I then have brought here to Intercom. I will say though, I from my own experience of working for people who, join a company and just say, all right, great, this is what worked there, it'll work here. I've never seen that be successful. So I try to be as conscientious as I can around not just trying to, force a way of working or a sales methodology on a new company. I really want to spend time listening to customers and understanding our position and the relationships we're trying to build and kind of work around that to find a methodology that's, that AEs and RMs can find comfort in and a framework to provide them with and kind of guide them. But I don't want to be overly prescriptive.
That makes a lot of sense. You one of the things that we were talking about offline that we sort of defined as an area of expertise, which I think is really, really relevant to pretty much everybody, is this concept of moving up market. And certainly when you join Dropbox, most people think about Dropbox as essentially, maybe a prosumer technology platform. It's either for consumers or maybe for very, very small SMB customers. How do you move? But of course, now they're a public company, and I'm sure they have a large B2B mid-market enterprise sales team. So what are your strategies for moving, quote unquote, moving up market? And how do you help shift an organization either from a self-serve model or from a high velocity transactional model to a much longer, more consultative sales process?
Yeah. So when I joined Dropbox, they had a small inbound sales team that was really more of a rotational program they had for recent grads than anything. And it was really an experiment. And to your point, yes, at that point, almost all revenue, and there was a lot of it even back then, was coming from the kind of prosumer side of the business. But in preparing for what later became, the public event, I think, the executive team and investors realized that will be very limiting for us from a market cap perspective and future, potential if we cannot build a meaningful B2B business. So when I came in, we started at square one. And, back then we were closing tiny deals for, $1,000 to maybe several $1,000s. And what we pulled up on was what was actually going on with inside these accounts on the consumer side. So what was really fascinating that we saw was, and doing our research, is that a lot of people were signing up for a consumer version of Dropbox with their work email. And that's like kind of counterintuitive, right? It was like, well, why would you do this if this is purely for your own personal use? Like you're using this for family photos or maybe your tax returns and storing, important documents. Why would you do that? And, in looking at metadata, you would see, okay, well, these people are connected to, other people on that work domain. And like, okay, they're sharing files with each other. Okay, that's interesting. Like they're using this for business purposes. If we can understand why Dropbox is a non-sanctioned software that they are finding value in for business purposes, that's probably a story that we can tell and then target to the appropriate audience of like something they're missing in their stack that they need. And through that process, we kind of were able to put together our kind of initial sales playbook that was very focused on, certain industries at the time and selling to certain people where we knew there was a real need in their business and where their current solutions just weren't kind of meeting muster for their end users. So we went from, closing deals for a couple $1,000. I still actually remember the first time we closed a $10,000 deal. Our office was in San Francisco, down by the baseball stadium. We walked over to Safeway, which was right across the street there, right across King Street. And we got a Safeway ice cream cake. and we brought it back to the office and had a little celebration for our first $10,000 deal. And that was back in 2013. Fast forward to the time I left, we were closing multi-million dollar deals. And, a lot of it was working with the product team to help them understand the problems we needed to solve for larger customers and why those certain requirements were important. And as we kind of were able to bring that feedback, and the product evolved, we were finding increasingly better product market fit for larger and larger companies. And we were able to solve larger and larger problems, and we got to a place where we were closing these really large deals in a very repeatable way. And that sales team grew from just a couple folks in San Francisco and Dublin when I first joined to hundreds and doing north of 100 million in revenue.
Did you have to hire a different type of salesperson or, trade out people that were more suited for a different type of sale? Or were you building new teams anyway? You were calling, the old team was called SMB and now the new team is called Enterprise. So it was clear that it was going to be a different profile of account executive.
Yeah, it was definitely a different profile. So a lot of the early folks that had joined Dropbox were joining because, it was this rocket ship and they just wanted to latch on and get in anywhere they could. And so we had a lot of people that had investment banking backgrounds or consulting backgrounds. And some of them were actually incredibly excited to, pursue a career in sales. But a lot of them actually viewed it more as like an experiment and not something they want to do longer term. And what was really interesting too, Sam, was a lot of these people had never failed before. And so we had a lot of people on the team who are insanely bright, Harvard, MIT educated,
These were
had
people on the sales
MBAs.
team?
Yeah, on the initial sales team. It was a profile we were working with. And these people were incredibly bright, but I think were just naturally very bright and didn't have to work too hard academically. Things just kind of came to them quickly. And then you get them into a sales role where they're, a new business rep being told no 80% of the time. And that's a hard thing to do in the long term for them. So yeah, we definitely had to change the profile of people we were hiring and developing over time. And I think as that evolved and we learned more about what was going to work for us, we started seeing more success as well.
What are some of the other pitfalls or common mistakes that you saw in your time at Dropbox that, you think you want to share with the rest of us so that we don't make them?
I think, there's quite a few. One is make sure you build very strong relationships with the different kind of cross-functional partners who are going to help your team be successful and really prioritize those. I actually think, in preparing for this podcast, I was listening to a chat you had with Dan from Datadog.
Dan Foucher.
Yeah. It was great, by the way. And one of the things that you really left me with at the end was you were talking about as you evolve as a manager and leader, what your first team really is over time. That was definitely a lesson I learned. I had to go from, kind of defense and champion mode for the sales team to, kind of business leader and really think about, if I'm not able to accomplish the things I think that are important for our customers from a product perspective and from a roadmap perspective, why is that? We're all here for the same reasons, but we're speaking a different language, I think. So for me, it was really prioritizing those relationships with R&D to really make sure that they understood the increasing complexity of the needs for our customers and made sure we were building the right things. And it quickly changed. And I actually remember what led to that. So a gentleman named Ross Piper, who led enterprise strategy back then at Dropbox and former Salesforce guy, he told me, Katz, the best thing you can do is go out on the road with some of the folks from our R&D team. Let them meet directly with customers and hear directly from customers. And so I put together like this little road show where we went around and we met with current customers, prospective customers, some former customers as well. And I just got out of the way and just let them have a dialogue directly with our customers and hear what's working, what they're excited about, what they need and why. And that totally changed the relationship that I had with our R&D team. And I did a very similar thing when I got here to Intercom. When I arrived here, there wasn't really the relationship that I knew we needed between our organizations internally. And one of the first things I did was like, hey, guys, you're in Dublin, jump on a plane, get over here. We're going to go meet with some customers.
That's great advice. Some of the challenges of moving upmarket relate sometimes to like fundamental architectural problems with the code base. And I'm not sure if you dealt with any of that, because a lot of the times what happens is you get new security requirements Sometimes if you're cloud-based, the customer will say, we want a single tenant environment. We don't want to be a multi-tenant environment, especially when it's file sharing and they're managing sensitive information. They might need you to go through, SOC 2 or some kind of security certification. We tried to do that at Livestream, but the architecture of the platform was so inherently focused on, multi-tenant. They would ask for fidelity, in fact, ask for like network diagrams. Show us your network diagram so that we can confirm, that it's architected in the way that makes us feel safe. Did you deal with some of those challenges at Dropbox? And if so, how did you tackle them?
Yeah, we certainly did early on. I would say, and some of the things at the time when we were kind of getting feedback and kind of actually like opening the hood and looking at what we're working with, presented some real concern early on for us. Having said that, we were able to work successfully through a lot of those early challenges. Some of the challenges were around the way that the architecture is set up for file sync and share between different users. And when you get into a business environment where you want to have, role-based access control and have administrative controls and visibility into who on my teams is sharing what and with whom at what time. On the consumer side, that really wasn't a challenge. We actually wanted to be really open. We didn't want this kind of rank and order kind of process, and our consumer users really wouldn't benefit nor or were interested in that. And that actually took a pretty complete re-architecture of the way that we actually thought about sharing files and folders. But we were able to get through it. Dropbox has, still to this day, one of the most incredible engineering teams you'll ever see for a technology company, and we were able to work through those challenges.
That's fantastic. A comment that you've made in sales, no is a word we're trained to avoid or overcome, but you think sales reps should actually embrace it, especially for upmarket customers. Help us unpack, that concept.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake you can make early on, and this really relates back to moving up market, is when you're moving up market, you're working in many cases at a company and with a team that you're going to get into uncharted territory for them. Right. And that's certainly true here at Intercom. When we started, I was fortunate enough to even have the opportunity to join Intercom because of this amazing self-service business that Intercom had created based off of the quality of the product. And, that is a month-to-month transactional business where you are trying to have as little friction in the buying process as possible. And you're constantly A/B testing and figuring out how can we make this more streamlined? How can we remove as much friction in the buying process for folks? And as you move up market and you're having more human interaction, you actually need those points of friction and those pull-up points where you want some contention to figure out, are we both aligned on what the right expectations are for this evaluation going forward? And you want to make sure you're bringing a lot of rigor to helping understand a customer's needs and make sure that you can actually meet them short or slightly longer term. And when you're doing that, you're working with teams that, oftentimes, as I mentioned, are uncharted territories. Maybe they haven't built product for these larger companies in the past. They haven't marketed to them. The way that you market to, a 10-person company is vastly different the way you market to a 10,000-person company. So what are the important things you need to nail? And so I think a lot of what we need to do is show early success and build confidence that we could move up market. And the best way to do that is make sure that when you're bringing deals forward that might require some work or some modifications to longer term roadmap, you better win that business and make them very successful. And so I think you have to bring a high degree of scrutiny to that deal evaluation early on and make sure that you're very aligned and very upfront and honest with what your product can accomplish and what it cannot. And I think this is a huge mistake that people in sales make, especially earlier in their careers, is they oversell because they're worried about saying, no, we can't do that, and it killing a deal. And from my experience, it's usually the opposite. Buyers, especially more technical buyers, want and understand that when they're buying software that's meant for a broad audience, it's not going to accomplish everything they need it to. And you're going to have to make trade-offs. Now, they'll do business with you if they're willing to make the right trade-offs. And maybe there's certain things that are a must-have for them and you can't do. Part ways. Don't oversell because you're going to lose a friend in the market.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard, though, because it just depends on how big the pipeline is and what your revenue targets are and whether you feel like you can let that deal walk away.
Yeah, I mean, back to what Dan said, and he talks about PG, pipeline growth, and pipe ad there. I think the best way to combat that is to always be building pipeline. And I think our most confident reps here and the ones that I think have the most repeatable success over time are constantly looking for new opportunities because, they're cautiously optimistic around the deals they have in their pipeline and they're never going to rely too heavily on any one. But look, there are times where we've walked away from deals here that we just needed to because it wasn't a good fit for us and we knew it wasn't going to be the right fit for a prospective customer. And sometimes that actually has a real impact on reps and their ability to kind of hit in that quarter in that year. So that goes back to my point. The earlier we can really apply that high degree of scrutiny, the better.
And so when you say, high degree of rigor, and are you talking about a qualification methodology like a medic where you basically list out, and sometimes we, my last company, we called it med-picars. I mean, basically every letter was like a question you needed to answer thoughtfully and credibly in order to move forward in the sales cycle. Is it something like that to help confirm, hey, we have 20 requirements and these are the questions that need to be answered?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we do it from both a kind of commercial side to the deal, and also from a technical and security side to the deal. So, yeah, we increasingly are relying on Medic as well as our kind of true north for evaluation process. But I'd say here at Intercom, this is still early days for us. And we're just more recently getting into these larger multi-million-dollar deals. Whereas, when I first joined, a larger deal for us back then would have been, 25 or 50K. And it's not to say that we shy away from those. We still have those as a really important part to our revenue and our growth. But increasingly, we are getting into these more complicated deals where, the medic structure is becoming more important.
And last sort of substantive question, and then would love to talk about some of your influences and some of the folks that have impacted your career. But, there's this concept that challenge, I guess CEB via Gartner, because Gartner on CEB now talks about, 5.4 people are needed to make a decision on an enterprise purchasing process. And that was years ago. And, one of the guys, Brent Adamson, who wrote The Challenger Customer, is saying that number might be as high as 9 or 10. How do you build the width and the depth of kind of buyer preference into the sales cycle so that you can make sure that the reps are getting not just to, the E in medic as economic buyer, not just to the economic buyer, but also to the wide range of support you need in an organization in order to move a purchase forward?
It's a great point. Yeah, a 9 even seems like maybe that's not the right number anymore.
It's got to be like 20.
Yeah, I think something that I think when you get into these larger, more complicated deals, you need to understand is not just like the economic buyer, but you need to understand the political environment that is taking shape within that customer. And so I think this takes a long time to do, but what we do is as early on in the process as we can is we start trying to map out what we think the organizational structure looks like and understand the people that we are working with. And it kind of looks like, it's like an episode from some crime show where, you have the detective in some back room drinking coffee with a cigarette and they have like a big board with, they're connecting yarn dots on things like this person is with this person. I think we are trying to understand real influence and understand what are the underlying motivations of the different people we're working with.
Do you have a framework for figuring that out?
I wish I could say that we've nailed down a specific framework for it. It's really just, we literally map out an organizational chart of decision makers and influencers and motivation. And across those three things for each person we're talking with, we try to strength test and kind of verify with them who else needs to be part of this. But we really try to understand each individual's motivation and what they're hoping to accomplish by either being supportive of Intercom at their organization or why they might be hesitant, and try to make our best judgment as to like what we think their kind of core motivations really are.
And sometimes maybe just by asking them, what are your motivations? What are you trying to accomplish this year? Questions like that.
Certainly. Yeah, we start very clearly there, just trying to understand their motivation. This goes right back to just the Sandler fundamentals, right? As you're going through kind of the pain gain funnel, there's the different levels of pain and gain. And, the deepest level 3 is personal pain or gain. And so we're really teaching our team to try to get to that point where you understand not just, what is the financial impact of this decision, but what does that financial impact actually mean to this person, whether they're the decision maker or an influencer.
Makes perfect sense. I caught something while you were speaking. So people call you Katz. That's how people refer to you.
So there's a lot of Davids out there. There's in my experience, there's fewer Katz. Although, funny enough, when I was at Dropbox, I was the only Katz for a long time. So my email was just Katz@Dropbox.
Badass.
And then it was great. Very proud of that. And then later on, a woman named More Katz joined the organization, MOHR Katz. Which was just hilarious to see. Like, okay, we have more Katz now. Katz is totally fine by me.
All right. So Katz, we're for this session, we're at the end of our time together. We hope to get you back for Friday Fundamentals this week, but we like to have a little bit of, pay it forward on the show where there's people listening. Maybe there's a couple books that you've read that have really impacted you, or a couple mentors or sales leaders that you really respect. Who are some of, the key influences in your career that you want us to know about?
There's so many. I look back to Dan Shapiro at LinkedIn, who's now the vice president of kind of global sales. He owns all sales and has actually just recently moved into that role as Mike Gampson, after years of incredible work, has decided to kind of move on and spend more time with his family. Dan Shapiro is one of the most incredible leaders I've ever witnessed. And the reason I say that is he had the rare ability to have a conversation with you at ground level and then take it back up to 30,000 feet and then back down to like 10,000 feet really quickly. He could operate at all these different levels and had this very rare blend of analytical capability and just raw intellectual horsepower and insanely high situational awareness and EQ. Like he knew exactly what wasn't being said and therefore always knew what needed to be said. And it was incredible to observe and witness.
That's fantastic.
A favorite book that he gave to a lot of us when we were early managers there was a book called Multipliers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I'm
not.
So, and I'm totally spacing on the author, but people can look it up. So, Google it. So Multipliers essentially talks through two different types of leaders. There is one camp, which is the empire builder, which is someone that, might be very successful from a performance perspective by, bringing very talented people in the organization and then keeping them in their organization. And these people kind of try to build these empires of high performing people, but then hold on to them. And then there's a second camp of people, and this is something that struck me and has stayed with me in my experience, and I think has served me well so far, is the second camp of the multiplier, the person who brings in and works with these incredibly talented people, but knows when for them to move on to a new role that might be outside of their organization and might mean, short-term hit to performance of their org, regardless if it's sales, marketing, or any team. And I've always kind of kept that in mind as I'm thinking about our team and their career development, and encourage my leaders to be doing the same, because you might mean a short-term hit. And in some cases, it's actually encouraging someone here at Intercom to take a new role at another company. But I think in doing that in the long term, you become known as someone who has the best interest of their employees at mind and is seriously keeping a lookout for what is really important to them in their careers. And then you will always be able to attract the future high talent that you want by having that method, because people will know that when it's time, you're going to help them get onto that next role, even if it doesn't immediately impact in a positive way you as the leader.
I think it's a great lesson. Katz, it's been great having you on the show. There are people out there that are listening, and they've loved the soft, soothing sounds of your voice. They probably identified with what it sounds like is a really great and kind of servant leadership style management approach that you take in terms of empowering the people that you work with. And so if they want to get in touch with you, is that okay? And what is your preferred method of communication?
Yeah. I actually even state this just on my LinkedIn profile. I'm happy to help people. There have been plenty of people in my life who have helped me and gone out of their way. And so I always feel a need to pay it forward. So people can always shoot me a note on LinkedIn and I'll get back to them. Or if they want to email me directly, it's david.katz, Katz, at Intercom.
Fantastic. David, thanks so much for being on the show. It was fantastic.
Sam, it was great to be here. Thank you so much.
Hey folks, it is Sam's Corner. Another good interview, really great interview with Katz, with David Katz, Senior Sales Director at Intercom. I really enjoyed speaking with David, and he's got a great background. For all those folks out there that aren't sure if they want a career in sales, he graduated and thought he was going to work in public policy or in law, and realized after a quick bit of time that it wasn't a good fit for him. And I think one of the ways he realized is that by looking across the room at the other people that he was working with and figuring out did they deliver energy for him? Did they motivate him and inspire him to be as good as he could be? And he realized that no, the answer was that wasn't the case. And so that's how he ultimately moved into a career in technology sales. Now, one of the things that he talked about was this concept of an informational interview. And I really just think I want to spotlight that. How did he get a job at LinkedIn? He reached out to somebody at LinkedIn and said, hey, and maybe he reached out on LinkedIn, but he said, hey, I saw that you just joined LinkedIn in the sales function. I would really love to hear, best practices and what you've learned so far and a little bit about the experience. He didn't specifically ask for a job. He asked for an informational interview. He asked to learn more. And that concept of asking to learn more, I think, can work in sales and it can work in your career. And so just use that concept, use that idea of, hey, can I grab 15 minutes of your time either on the phone or for a coffee? You'll be surprised at how often that works. Something else that David talked about, we spent a lot of time talking about how to move up market. And first of all, one of the things that he didn't mention, but is emphatically true, is something I can tell you personally. The move up market has to come from the top. It has to come from the CEO, because ultimately the founder and the CEO is the person that can align the engineering organization with the sales organization. If the sales team is the only team that's moving up market, and sometimes they're moving up market because they're chasing higher deals because the targets are getting more and more difficult to attain, and they're not taking the engineering team with them, that's a recipe for disaster. And especially if the CEO is only half-heartedly embracing this move. So it needs to be an entire organization shift. And I think Erica Schultz from New Relic says, enterprise sales is a team sport. That is so, so true. Now, David mentioned that, one of the instincts of salespeople is to say, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. And I have to tell you, it's a terrible, terrible habit. Your product cannot do everything, and everybody knows that cannot do everything. And you may think that you sound very definitive and authoritative in saying, yes, it can do that, yes, it can do that, yes, it can do that, but you're not helping anything. And if you remember back to one of our first episodes with Todd Capone, who wrote The Transparency Sale, he talks about this idea that transparency is what gains credibility and what helps you make that sale. So it's really, really important that you are able to say no to the customer, that you are able to have a thoughtful, honest interaction, that you use something like a MEDDIC or some kind of qualification methodology, which forces you to get answers to questions or address difficulties. And again, you're looking for alignment, not just from a product perspective, but from a sales perspective and from a strategic perspective. And if you cannot get that alignment, then you can't forecast the deal and you shouldn't be able to move forward. And it is okay to tell your buyer that your product cannot do everything. They know that it can't do everything. When you say that it can, you look like an idiot and you look like a liar. Don't do that. Be honest. Be honest about the capabilities of the product. Be honest about what it can accomplish. And you will find yourself assuming that you're working with a good product. Because, by the way, being honest about something that actually, that sucks shit is not going to be, that's not going to work. You have to work for a great product that has certain limitations, and then you can be honest about where it fits and where it doesn't fit. Proper qualification is just so critical, because otherwise you're just going to be, it doesn't do any good to make a sale that's later going to churn. It's the open secret about recurring revenue businesses. We care about new business acquisition, but only if it sticks around, because we're paying you a lot of money to close that business. And if that customer goes away because you lied to them, it doesn't help anybody. And if you find that the only way to make the sale is to lie, then you're at the wrong company, because there should be a way to be honest about what the product can do and still make the sale. So that's my lecture. Thank you so much to our sponsors for supporting us in our show. Of course, we want to thank Chorus, the leading conversation intelligence platform, and Outreach, the leading sales engagement platform. Two amazing products. This has been the Sales Hacker Podcast in Sam's Corner. This is Sam Jacobs. Reach out to me if you want to get in touch. I'm at LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in, and then /again, I think, and then Sam F. Jacobs. You can email me if you want, sam.f.jacobs@gmail.com. I don't usually give away my Gmail address, but give it a shot. But LinkedIn is also a very, very good way to get in touch. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.